First of all, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Dr. Upal Basu Roy, and I am the Executive Director of Research at LUNGevity Foundation, and we are a United States patient advocacy group serving the lung cancer community, and we have a global footprint. 3 years ago, Longevity started on this project where we wanted to make clinical trials more patient-centric. And as a part of that project, we went and interviewed 8 patients who had been on clinical trials and asked them, can you walk us through the process, how easy it was, how difficult it was, what was missing, and equally importantly, what could have been done differently to make your decision-making process easier. And we went through this entire process right from the point of a patient finding a trial to taking it to the oncologist and then talking to the trial nurse, getting onboarded, going through the trial process and the trial ending. And there were obviously, you can imagine, there were a lot of pain points in this process. But one of the key things that jumped out to us was when we heard patients saying that the onboarding process could be easier where if they were given more information. And they were also very, very cognizant of the fact that the trial nurses, you have a finite amount of time, so, they cannot give you all the information. So they told us that, what, if we had the informed consent form a little bit more detailed, a little bit more written for us, a lot of the information that we would be looking for could be found in the informed consent. And one of the patients actually told us that, what, sometimes we're given the form on a Friday and we have to make a decision by Monday. So making the form easier. So that was the genesis of the project. And the genesis stems again from this overall big initiative the LUNGevity Foundation has, streamlining clinical trials for patients, and which is what brings us to the project that Dr. King Kalaman has talked about. How can we make informed consent forms more readable and more accessible for the patient community? Again, that's a very good question. For me, there were a lot of key findings, but I think what was really surprising for me was the fact that, again, maybe to take a step back, we audited, we analyzed 20 informed consent forms, and we sampled a spectrum of different lung cancer trials, right, from phase 3 to phase 1, and even a single patient IND, because we want to get a sense of whether these forms are written differently. But I think one thing that consistently stuck out to me was the amount of importance that was given to this particular part of the trial, which is what happens when if the trial fails, or what happens if the trial stops. And I'll take that back to the initial patient interviews that we did. It tied back very nicely with the same concern that as a patient, if I'm on a trial, what happens if the trial stops? What happens if I'm the patient who's doing really well on a drug, but if the trial is stopped because of futility? Does that mean that I will stop receiving the drug? So that for me was very, very, very surprising. I think closing the loop for a patient through the informed consent form is incredibly important. The reason being, if Belinda and I had a magic wand, we would clean up informed consent forms directly. But we're also realistic, and we know that each pharma, each sponsor has their own template for an informed consent, and it is very difficult for us to tackle individual informed consent forms. So then the next best solution is really creating an addendum. And the addendum would serve not to make patients expert in a particular clinical trial. The goal of the addendum is to really make sure that patients have access to, at the tip of their fingers, the most pertinent information they need to navigate the trial, which is, can I take a decision today to participate in the trial? What happens if these different situations arise? What happens if I have side effects that I need to deal with? What happens if I'm feeling sick in the middle of the night? Who's going to pay for the trial? What am I responsible for in terms of financial commitment to continue to participate in the trial? So very, very specific questions that are really top of mind for the patient community, and addendum can help answer those questions quickly and in an accessible fashion. Because again, keep in mind that 25 page form, a lot of that is legalese, and the average patient does not care about that legalese. So the addendum is all about extracting what is pertinent, putting it in a patient-friendly language, because Belinda talked about readability. A lot of forms are not written at an 8th grade level, so making sure that the addendum has patient necessary patient information at a reading level that patients can easily access when they're making these different decisions during the trial journey. I think I think I would not just say as a lung cancer patient advocate in research. I think pretty much all oncology trials, pretty much all clinical trials, I think we depend on we are very dependent on the patient community for really advancing science. And I think if we use something like an addendum, if we make the informed consent process more easy, more seamless, more participatory, more engaging, as Belinda pointed out, this entire process was conceptualized in partnership with patients. I think right from the informed consent process, if we really, really make patients partners in this research and clinical trials, I think the value proposition is much more clear, and I think we'll have a much more healthier clinical trial ecosystem. And that is really what our goal is, to make patients be absolute partners in this process. And that, I think, would be the impact of doing something like this.